Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. In today's episode, we're highlighting the field of forensic science, more specifically, forensic pathology. What is forensic pathology? What do they do? How many of them are here in the state? And is it like what you see on TV and hear on podcasts? Here to answer those questions and more is Dr. Adele Lewis. Dr. Lewis is the state chief medical examiner for the Tennessee Department of Health and only one of 800 forensic pathologists in the country. Dr. Lewis, thank you for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciated this. Okay, so big question. What is forensic pathology in relation to like psychiatry or anthropology?
So psychiatry and anthropology are very different things in themselves. But forensic pathology, a forensic pathologist is a medical doctor who performs autopsies and directs death investigations. And the goal there is to determine the cause and manner of death in unusual or unnatural or suspicious deaths.
Okay. That's a lot of work you all do. That's pretty intense.
There's a lot of work in Tennessee.
What are the requirements to become a forensic pathologist?
Forensic
pathologist.
Sure. So first you have to get your bachelor's degree. Then you have to go to medical school and get your either MD degree or your DO degree. Then you do a pathology residency, which is at least 3 years, more commonly 5. And then an extra year of forensic pathology training after that. I took a more circuitous route in that before I did the pathology training, I actually did 3 years of general surgery training and 2 years of a trauma fellowship. And all of that was at Vanderbilt. So after medical school, I had 9 years of training. Did
your training as a surgeon, does that help you in this job currently?
It does. It helps a lot, actually. And the trauma patients and the forensic pathology patients overlap to a significant degree. You know, they kind of are suffering from the same disease processes to a large extent. And so it really helped to know, why a patient would have a certain medical device or what the device was supposed to do, or I could tell, if it was in the wrong place better than someone who didn't have any experience with that. So I think it really helped. It really helped a lot to actually have been present when people died and know what that's like.
What is that like?
Well, we obviously had lots of people who did die in the trauma unit, and typically their family would be at the bedside, and this would be, someone who we decided that their brain was damaged so much that they were not going to recover, and the family decided to withdraw care. So meaning taking them off the ventilator and letting them die. We would give them drugs to make them comfortable and not have, it's called air hunger. So you can give people morphine, and that helps with the air hunger. And so you just wait. You don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But when it does, the monitors tell you what's going on, and then you go in and confirm it by listening to see if there's a heartbeat or if they're still breathing. But it's good to know because sometimes people have a seizure near the end. And this is one of my pet peeves in forensic pathology. Is that some forensic pathologists will put a lot of weight on whether or not there are bite hemorrhages in a person's tongue and say, oh, they must have had a seizure disorder, when in actuality it could have just been one of those terminal seizures.
I'm interested in the workload that you all have. Like, first of all, how many forensic pathologists are here in Tennessee, and what is the workload like?
Yeah, so there are about 27 or 28 forensic pathologists here in Tennessee. The forensic pathologists work in what's called the regional forensic centers, and there are 5 of those across the state. So I used to work at the Davidson County Medical Examiner's Office, and we would come in the morning and have a morning meeting, and an investigator who had been there, who was familiar with all the cases, would go over the cases, and we would typically have 2 doctors who were doing autopsies every day, and then those doctors would just decide which cases each of them would do. One thing that Tennessee has that I'm not sure any other state does is that by law, our forensic facilities are required to be accredited by the National Association of Medical Examiners. And one of their criteria is that they advise that you only do 250 autopsies a year. But if you have pathologists who are doing more than 325 autopsies a year, they can lose their accreditation.
Are they setting that advisement and those guidelines because of burnout and the potential of making mistakes?
Absolutely. It's more making mistakes than burnout. You don't want to get so busy that you get sloppy.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine getting sloppy could potentially affect some criminal cases involving murder and death.
Absolutely.
Have you ever heard of or seen a situation where there's a mistake that had some huge consequences on a potential court case?
I've seen errors, for example, of an infant that was a homicide, quite obviously, but the person who had performed the autopsy called it a natural death. And so that was a difficult conversation to have.
I imagine. Are infants more difficult to examine than, say, adults? Are there? This is really weird. I don't want to phrase this correctly, but are there different sets of corpses that you all examine that are some are a little bit easier to examine than others?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the most complex cases to me are child abuse victims. Those autopsies take a long time. You have to do a lot of special procedures in those cases, and to be able to demonstrate the injuries, and you have to photograph them so that you're pretty sure you're going to be in front of a jury at some point talking about them. So those are the most difficult cases. In general, a healthy person who overdoses on drugs is a less complex case because, if there's nothing really wrong with them physically that you discover at autopsy, so you have to wait for the toxicology to come back. But those are probably the fastest ones.
Mm-hmm. So you spend a lot of time around death.
I do.
How do you grow accustomed to that? Is that the right phrase? How do you balance that in your life?
Well, you do a lot of compartmentalizing.
Mm-hmm.
You really just kind of get used to it. It's kind of funny, one of the questions that a psychiatrist will ask you to figure out if you're feeling depressed or not is, are you having frequent thoughts of death? Yeah. And so I'm like, well, of course. Mm-hmm. So it would be my answer to that question. There is a whole lot of gallows humor. Forensic pathologists are kind of a unique breed of people. Mm-hmm. Very quirky for the most part.
Yeah.
There are here now, probably in the last 20 years or so, people are being more mindful of physician wellness and having wellness programs in their offices, doing team building exercises and things like that. So there is definitely a movement within forensic pathology to address physician wellness and also death investigator wellness as well. We call them the last responders as opposed to first responders. Mm-hmm. And so most counties in Tennessee use death investigators to go to death scenes.
And I'm sure they're seeing some images that are going to be hard to forget.
Yes, they are.
I'm curious about how I'm sure you all try hard as possible not to take work home with you. But if you're mentoring or advising a young forensic pathologist who's getting into the field or someone in medical school, what do you tell them about these kind of unspoken, unknown parts of the trade and the craft that you have to be aware of so in order for you to remain healthy, not only physically, but of sound mind and spirit?
Well, I guess you have to make those things not unknown and not unspoken, and actually address it and make sure it's not becoming a problem for a person, And that's true for physician wellness in general. We are focusing more on that throughout the field of medicine, and we've also had some legislation to address things like physician wellness as well. So it's really taking off, and I think it's to the benefit of everyone.
How do you handle that? Aside from the macabre, little dark sense of humor, how do you personally adjust it?
Well, I never know how to answer this question because it's definitely humor helps, and just discussing cases with other forensic pathologists is very beneficial. And to that end, we actually have, this is a little bit embarrassing, but a Women in Forensic Pathology Facebook group where, I've made several friends online in that group and actually have, talked to those people on the phone about stuff and about different cases and what would you do or what would you call this.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm. It is really good. Back
to Tennessee and what's happening here in the state, what are some of the trends you see as far as regarding death lately in our state?
Well, certainly we think about overdose deaths. We actually had some good news in 2023. The overdose deaths decreased by about 25% nationwide and in Tennessee. Our rate of overdose deaths in Tennessee is still higher than the national average. But the health department in particular is actively trying to come up with ways to help decrease that. I think a lot of the progress that we've made is because of the availability of Narcan. Now, the reversal drug, you can find it almost anywhere. And I think some of the police stations even have vending machines with Narcan in them. So I think that's done a whole lot of good for Tennessee. That's an area of improvement, although it still needs to be worked on. Are there any other areas and trends in deaths that you're seeing here? How many natural deaths are we having in a year? All told, we have about 70,000 deaths a year, which really sounds like a lot. Of those, the rate at which you're supposed to ideally be performing autopsies is 1 autopsy per 1,000 people in the population. And our accrediting body says that you are much more likely to be missing homicides if you're doing fewer than that number of autopsies. So that's another problem with the lack of forensic pathologists and the increasing number of drug overdose and violent deaths.
What's it going to take to get more forensic pathologists to help you all out? Well,
it's tough. So when you go into pathology, you can make a whole lot more money if you don't do forensic pathology because typically it is a government job. There are some scattered private practices, and in fact, the Davidson County Medical Examiner's Office is a private practice. But for the most part, they are government jobs. So what they have done in order to attract more medical students into the field is there are some loan forgiveness programs, especially if you continue to serve as a medical examiner for a certain number of years after you finish your training. And also just really trying to make the field more visible. People don't think about forensic pathology very much, despite the TV shows about it. People forget about that part of things and forget that that's a whole entire field of medicine. And so it's not frequently considered as a career option.
But it's a career that's desperately needed, right?
It is. It is.
Well, hopefully someone is listening who can help to that end. All right, we're going to take a break. Our guest for the entire hour is the Tennessee Department of Health's State Chief Medical Examiner, Adele Lewis. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Lewis and uncover the real deal behind a medical examiner's day-to-day, how the cause of death is determined, and what role they play or don't play in the criminal justice system. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com. Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. Today, we're speaking with Tennessee Department of Health's State Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Adele Lewis. Now, in the last segment, we focused on the broad issues impacting the profession in forensic pathology, but now we want to get into what it's really like to work into the field of forensic medicine. Dr. Lewis, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. How hard is it to really determine someone's cause of death? There's a crime shows, we see someone is shot 9 times or stabbed 12 times. But tell me about like the nuances there when really deciding.
Sure. So it's really easy to tell someone's cause of death when they've been shot 9 times or stabbed 12 times. What you need to do in cases like that is document the appearance of the injuries to determine, for example, in a gunshot wound, whether a wound is an entrance or an exit wound. Mm-hmm. You can roughly determine range of fire. And then you need to trace the path of the bullet and what organs it injured. So that's what we do in those multiple gunshot wound cases and in the multiple stab wound cases. But there are cases where we can't find anything. A lot of those, I think, are probably cardiac arrhythmias that are probably inheritable. DNA testing is available for those. It's difficult to get funding to perform DNA testing on everyone, but that's sort of an up-and-coming part of doing autopsies in people. If you have a totally negative autopsy, it's I would consider it very helpful and close to standard of care, at least, to get some genetic testing as well.
You know, watch these television shows. It seems like they're fully funded with all the latest tech and gear, and they send out for DNA and it comes back in 30 minutes, what have you. Is that the case? How long does it take to get DNA results back?
So I'm glad you asked that, because we actually, at the State Chief Medical Examiner's Office, we got a federal grant a couple years ago, and we acquired a rapid DNA machine that can match up a person who is suspected to be a relative of a decedent with the decedent in 2.5 hours. So that's really awesome. But usually it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get the results back when you send it to a conventional lab.
That's a long time.
It is a long time.
I can imagine there's probably, I imagine law enforcement, if they're conducting an investigation, has patients because they're used to that time, but someone's family members may be a little bit off. Are you ever in communication with family members about, the people that you're working on?
Oh, yes, we do. You really need to talk to the family members if they want to talk to you. Some of them don't want to have anything to do with it. And then some of them call and email every day. It really varies a lot between how people deal with the death of a loved one and with that loved one going to the medical examiner's office to have an autopsy.
Can you recall a conversation? I'm sure all of these things are confidential, but can you call just with certain details that you can share, a conversation that really impacted you with a family member?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail. I think probably one of the more difficult, or probably the most difficult conversations that we have with families are either the people who are co-sleeping with an infant and accidentally roll over on top of the child and the child suffocates, or people whose loved one have died by suicide. A lot of people just really can't believe it.
Yeah. That's got to be hard on you all.
Yeah, those are difficult, and it's difficult to talk somebody into their relative having committed suicide. And we actually had some legislation passed about 8 years ago that establishes a long, complicated process in which a person can appeal a suicide ruling as a manner of death. So there's a formal process
for that. I imagine these difficult conversations and stresses are some of the things you talk about in your groups.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's a topic of conversation.
It's very helpful for you all, I imagine.
It is. It's good.
Again, it's like watching television or listening to these true crime podcasts. I mean, they're fascinating. I remember watching CSI and they get an autopsy done in a couple hours. Does it take that long? How long does an autopsy actually take?
Well, in a simple, straightforward case, like I was talking about earlier, maybe 30 minutes. In a complex case, again, for example, a child abuse case, that can take 3 or 4 hours. It takes a really long time, and you have to be very thorough.
Now, are you the ones filling out death certificates?
Yes. So the forensic pathologists typically fill out the death certificates for the cases that they autopsy. By law, any non-natural death has to be filled out by the county medical examiner of the county in which the death occurred. So we often also find death certificates that should have been referred to the medical examiner's office but weren't. And part of the problem with that is that in medical school, very few people have any formal training whatsoever on what to write on a death certificate. And they sometimes get defensive when you try to lead them along with this is what we want you to put on the death certificate, right? We don't want you to write cardiopulmonary arrest because everyone is going to die of a cardiopulmonary arrest. I can guarantee it.
Okay.
Right?
So that means your heart stops beating.
Your heart stops beating and you stop breathing.
Okay.
So that's sort of the definition, right? Mm-hmm. So we try to educate people on that. But I guess the way that we discover those deaths frequently is that every person who is cremated, the permit has to be signed off by a county medical examiner. And so the vast majority of our county medical examiners require that the person have a completed death certificate before they'll do that, which is great. Now, we still miss some. Even with that, I had a case many years ago where the cause of death was listed as enterocutaneous fistula.
What's that?
That is where you have an abnormal connection between your bowels and your skin. So you're leaking intestinal contents out of your skin. It's very awful. Yeah. And I thought, well, you can see that with Crohn's disease. I said, this is a young person. It's probably Crohn's disease, but let's get the medical records and make sure. And come to find out, it was actually a person who had been attacked by his girlfriend with a machete.
That's very, very different cause of death.
So that was very different from Crohn's disease, right? So we corrected that death certificate. The person, unfortunately, had already been cremated. But we notified the district attorney, and they were fine with that because they had already prosecuted the responsible person as far as they felt that they could do it. So it was fortunately a no harm, no foul situation.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious as to what the new death certificate report said about the death by a machete. I'm sure it's just not simple as that, death by machete.
No, it's not. So there are different ways to phrase the cause of death statement. And in pathology, we say, maybe you're either a lumper or a splitter. So if you're a lumper, you're going to try to just put everything in one line and be done with it. So an example of that for the machete case would be complications of sharp force trauma to abdomen. Mm-hmm. And then you say homicide, and then there's a part where you describe how the injury occurred, and you would say attacked by others with the S in parentheses in case there's more than one assailant with machete. Mm-hmm. If you are a splitter, you might say sepsis due to interocutaneous fistula, due to, you could say, multiple abdominal operations due to multiple stab wounds to abdomen.
Gotcha. Okay. What are some of the the wrong misconceptions about being a forensic pathologist? Again, back to these television shows, they're showing up on the crime scene. How often do you actually go to a crime scene?
It's not very frequent that a forensic pathologist goes to a crime scene. In my role as the state chief medical examiner, we only respond to scenes if the county medical examiner asks us to do so, and that's very rare. And mostly that occurs when there's some sort of mass fatality event. Mm-hmm. So we had someone from my office respond to the Gatlinburg fires, and we responded to the floods last fall. Mm-hmm. And that's also true in the regional forensic centers. The forensic pathologists don't frequently go out on cases, but if it's a very high-profile case or it's something particularly interesting, a forensic pathologist would probably go along with their death investigator.
So when you show up on the field, tell us what it's actually like as opposed to what we see in the entertainment version on television.
Sure. So you don't leap out of a Hummer wearing high-heeled shoes.
Okay.
It's definitely not like that. It's pretty unglamorous because you're going usually into someone's home. Their home may be unkempt or messy. There may be, it may be muddy. You may have to climb down a ravine. There's just all sorts of things that make it difficult to retrieve a body sometimes. So yeah, it's definitely not all glamorous.
What is it like working with law enforcement when you're, dealing with a homicide or a suspected homicide and you all are doing your work? Obviously, I'm sure you go to court.
Yes.
For cases to testify. What is that experience like? How are you preparing yourself to go into there?
Yeah. So one of my roles as the state chief, and actually that it is our primary role, is the education and training of the county medical examiners and their investigators. And what we teach them and what's in the law is that the scene belongs to law enforcement, but the body belongs to the medical examiner. So law enforcement is not supposed to touch the body or do anything with the body until the medical examiner is there, and the medical examiner or their investigator is supposed to do it. Mm-hmm. So that is very clear to some law enforcement agencies and less clear to others. So it's really something that has to be handled at the local level. So we tell these county medical examiners and their investigators, you need to get with your law enforcement agencies and work this out with them beforehand. You don't want to have an argument over who has jurisdiction over something while you're right there on scene and tempers are hot. Mm-hmm. So yes, we do go to court a lot. And I still am going to court sometimes. For example, I'm going to court in the next couple months, I think, for a case that actually occurred in 1991. And the original forensic pathologist is deceased. And it was a cold case that they just solved. So I go to court to testify on those things. Sometimes the Innocence Project will consult me, and I will go to court for those cases if I feel that there's new evidence or a finding that was ignored the first time around. And then some forensic pathologists also do moonlighting, essentially, where they will take civil cases and testify in those.
How do you prepare to testify in court?
Yeah, it's kind of nerve-wracking the first few times. And we actually were discussing this on our Women in Pathology Facebook group. And a lot of people said, oh, well, I take beta blockers, which are medicines that slow down your heart rate and make you more calm. So that's one way to do it. One thing that I tell people to do is take a bottle of water with you. And if you get distracted, take a drink of the water, and it'll give you a moment to collect yourself. But you get to where you have a something that you recite your credentials and what is a forensic pathologist and what do you do and how did you come to perform this autopsy. Most of the times when you go to court, the district attorney has prepared you beforehand. Sometimes they haven't, and that can burn them a little bit.
Okay.
They'll, I think one of the adages is that you're not supposed to ask a question in court that you don't already know the answer to. Mm-hmm. And if they haven't prepped with their forensic pathologist, they may get an answer they're not expecting.
That can certainly turn a case.
Yes, it can turn a case.
I want to talk about technology real quick. Like, why is cause of death so important?
Well, the cause of death tells us what people at the local and the regional and the state and the national level, what they are dying from. Mm-hmm. So people say that heart disease is the number one killer in the United States, right? Some degree of that is because people don't know how to fill out death certificates and they're putting cardiac arrest on there. And so then the death certificate goes to the CDC and they assign it a code, and all they can assign it is a heart assignment, even if it was actually, breast cancer or something else. So the cause of death is really important from a statistical standpoint. It's also can be important for families that have a double indemnity policy where they get twice as much life insurance if the person has died by accidental means. Obviously, it can be very important if a person dies by suicide. Most insurance companies will pay for a death by suicide if it has been more than 2 years since the person purchased the policy. Mm-hmm. But if it has been sooner than that, they will not pay out. And I was involved with a case several years ago where it was about a $6 million policy. And there was a great deal of debate over whether the death was a suicide or not. And it actually ended up going to federal court because obviously the insurance company was not interested in paying that $6 million because I determined it to be a suicide.
What would be an example of someone dying from a seemingly health-related issue, but it's actually turned out to be a homicide?
Ooh, let me think about that. You could go all CSI and say, well, it could be an insulin overdose. That is not very common, but it does happen. We don't routinely test for insulin, so we would have to know that was a suspicion going into the autopsy. It's not something you can really do retrospectively. So you'd have to know that beforehand, and that's why we like to have as much history as possible from law enforcement and from our investigators. There was one that appeared to be a natural death, a person who I think he had cerebral palsy and was bedridden, and he was found deceased in bed one day. And it appeared to be a natural death, but it was sent for an autopsy anyway. And it turned out that his caregiver had stuffed toilet paper down his throat until he quit breathing. Mm. So that's very different.
Very, very different. Wow. I'm sure you all have pretty close relationships with law enforcement and investigators and detectives, I imagine.
We do. We try to have good relationships with law enforcement, detectives, the people at the TBI, and we're usually testifying for the prosecution in a criminal case. So we get to know the district attorneys pretty well also.
How important are those relationships? Obviously these people are trying to solve crimes, find out who is guilty, and so these people can, face justice. But these are human beings again. What I'm getting to is that you all are dealing with death. These folks are investigating death. You're investigating the causes of death. Do you all sometimes just kind of get together, particularly on a really tough case or something that's been hard to deal with and hard to stomach? Do you all just get together and just talk to each other about life, about what you're experiencing?
Cops kind of put on a tough tough guy facade a lot of the time. But we definitely will have meetings where we talk about the case, and I think during one of those meetings, you certainly could refer to, wow, this has been really difficult, and how are you guys holding up?
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the difference between a medical examiner and a coroner.
I love to explain this difference to
Okay.
people. Okay, so a coroner is a person who is elected to their position. They usually do not have medical experience. They typically have a daytime job. And I worked in Mississippi for a time, and Mississippi is a coroner system. And we had one coroner who was a used car salesman. And
Whoa.
I used to say, I wouldn't buy a van from a used car salesman who was also a coroner, because you don't know what he's been transporting in it, right? So a coroner is also beholden to their electorate. So we also had a case there. It was very suspicious for child abuse, but the coroner refused to order an autopsy because the child was of a very prominent family in town. Medical examiners, on the other hand, which is the system that we have here in Tennessee, we do not have any coroners anymore. Medical examiners are typically medical doctors. Some of them are medical doctors who are forensic pathologists, like me and the 27 other ones here in the state. They are usually appointed to their job rather than being elected. And sometimes the medical examiner is the person to perform that autopsy in the case of when they're the forensic pathologist. It's about 50-50 distribution across the United States, who is served by a coroner and who's served by a medical examiner. There are also other systems. For example, in California, there are some sheriff coroner offices where the person investigating the death actually works for the sheriff's department, and you can see how that would be a conflict of interest potentially in a police-related death. And we're very lucky in Tennessee that we are not employees of law enforcement. We are under the Department of Health. It is a medical procedure, and we are investigating the medical causes of death.
Okay. We're going to take one last break. When we come back, we're going to look at the mental state of people who are working in the field of forensic pathology. What is the community like? And how can you develop guardrails so you don't let the work spill into your personal life? We're going to talk about that and more when we come back. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Nobody Trashes Tennessee, the state of Tennessee's official litter prevention campaign, managed by TDOT. Details on how to be part of the solution to end littering at nobodytrashestennessee.com.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. This hour, we've been speaking with the Tennessee Department of Health's State Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Adele Lewis. Now, Dr. Lewis has enlightened us thus far on how to become a pathologist and what the job truly entails, that it's not like what you see on TV. But how do you remain in the field, and how can you avoid burnout? Dr. Lewis, again, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
You mentioned at the top of the show that you all kind of have let's say a little bit of a dark sense of humor, but it's helpful to help you go through the days. What is the community in the field of pathology like?
So forensic pathologists, many forensic pathologists are kind of quirky people. And I think you kind of have to be in order to do this kind of work. It's very different from other fields of medicine, obviously. You are probably not going to save anyone's life. And you're dealing with police, you're dealing with the justice system, and very rarely do other physicians come in contact with those entities. We do have annual conferences where many of the medical examiners across the country and some of their investigators get together, usually in a fairly desirable location. Yeah. So we get a little break maybe. So, and you stay in a hotel and and go to lectures and hear about interesting things. So people will present interesting cases that they have, or interesting ways that their system works, or laws that they have in their state that either work or don't work. And so we get together and talk about those things, and that's pretty cathartic.
What other ways do you guys band together and support each other and help each other, aside from the conference every once a year and the social media groups that you're a part of?
Sure. There is, in my experience, at most medical examiner offices, there is a great deal of camaraderie, and you become, it's sort of like going through a battle together. You are experiencing this sort of vicarious trauma every day with these other people, and you really bond over that. So we have some very close relationships with each other within the medical examiner community.
How did you all help each other out during the pandemic? I can imagine that was an incredibly stressful and very busy time for you all.
The pandemic was very busy. It was nothing anybody had ever seen before, obviously. Most of those COVID deaths did not go to the medical examiner's office because they were natural deaths. But we did have to deal with and figure out things like, where are we going to put all these deceased people? We had to acquire refrigerated tractor-trailer trucks in order to store bodies there. And so that is another big source of vicarious trauma, having to use a tractor trailer to put 17 deceased bodies into. I mean, that's not your normal everyday experience.
No.
We also, since I was at the Department of Health when COVID came, we also were trying to assist with appropriate certification of death, because again, most physicians don't have training in that. The CDC did offer up guidelines for that, but very few people read them. And then we had to deal with, there were rumors when COVID came that we were getting paid by the COVID positive death certificates that we filled out, which was absolutely untrue. Said I probably would drive a nicer car if that had been the case, because we did a lot of death certificates, of course. And then we kept up with the statistics as well. So the death certificate statistics lag about 2 weeks behind when the person actually died. So it takes a while to get the death certificate done and to get it transmitted to the CDC and get it coded so that you can use that data and see what's going on. So that was one thing we were trying to do, was track the number of deaths that we were having as well.
Do you all have to deal with the media much?
We do. I have done some TV and radio interviews in the past. So yeah, there's a lot of media interest, obviously, in the field, because it is pretty unique, and again, it's been publicized with all the TV shows.
Yeah. How do you advise colleagues to handle a media interview?
You have to be careful. You guys in the media can be a little snarky sometimes, and sometimes you have to make sure that you don't say something. Well, you don't want to say something outrageous, obviously, and you don't want to say something that a reporter with malicious intent could take out of context and quote you and make you appear to be, incompetent or mean-spirited or doing something intentionally bad. And so we do try to keep ourselves a little measured when we're talking to the media.
I understand, and probably trainings for each other to help get ready. Which reminds me, you said something. You said a lot of physicians obviously aren't familiar with how to properly fill out a death certificate. Is that something you wish medical schools would kind of invest a little bit more time in training future doctors on how to do these things?
Oh, absolutely. I wish that we We could train, maybe not the medical students so much because they're not filling out the death certificates anyway, but the residents, the people who have graduated medical school and are training in their selected field, they really need some training. And I have done those in the past. I try to get in to do them any chance I get. I kind of shoulder my way in and say, hey, I'm going to give you a talk about death certificates, so watch out.
Are there any other areas that you wish other medical professionals had a little bit more experience with to help you all in what your tasks are? Sure.
One other thing, and it's sort of related to death certificates, is understanding when the medical examiner needs to take jurisdiction over a case. So many physicians will say, well, I wasn't present when the person died, so I have no idea what happened to them. And you say, yeah, but you've been treating them for 30 years for their high blood pressure and their coronary artery disease and their diabetes. So I think you can surmise from that what the most likely cause of their death was. And they are obligated to sign those death certificates by law if they have seen the patient within the last 4 months. So the other problem that we have is I'm sure we are missing lots and lots of cases that are actually accidents that are being called naturals. And the best example I can give you of that is an elderly person who falls and breaks a hip and becomes bedridden and then dies some months later of pneumonia. That's still considered an accidental death. Doesn't matter what the time period is that elapses between the injury that caused the death and the actual death. It doesn't change the manner of death.
Okay.
We have 5 manners of death, basically, that we can choose from in Tennessee. We have natural, accident, homicide, suicide, and then we have could not be determined, which we use either when we don't have enough information or we have 2 or more equally compelling manners of death that we could choose.
That sounds really interesting. So I imagine in your job, you all have to be curious. You are obviously using your training, using the evidence at hand, but you gotta have to be, I don't want to say inventive, but creatively curious to determine what a person passed away from.
You do. The forensic pathologist, takes all these disparate sources of information. So we have law enforcement information. We might have family history. We could have medical records. We have the scene investigation. Then we have what we find at autopsy. We may have microscope slides that we've looked at. We may have a toxicology report. And so we take all those things and try to synthesize them into a coherent cause of death statement.
I understand your mom was a doctor as well.
She was.
Did that inspire you to do this?
It definitely inspired me to do this. My mom went to medical school when I was 10 years old, and the two of us lived in an apartment, just the two of us together, in a roach-infested apartment across the street from the medical school. And she would take me to the gross anatomy lab when I was 10 years old, which is hugely inappropriate, but that happened. And I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor. I was, very driven through high school and college, knowing that that's what I wanted to do.
And pathology is the way.
Pathology is the way, it turns out.
What's your advice to up-and-coming pathologists?
Well, I think the best advice that you could get as an up-and-coming pathologist is we try to limit bias. And so you try to go into every case with your eyes open and not get tunnel vision and not rule out anything until you have all that information, until you're able to have all the information that you're going to be able to get, and you have a chance to sit down and look at it and think about it and probably talk it over with a bunch of your peers as well. And so we have those, collaborative conferences where we will get together and review difficult cases.
Real quick before we wrap, I have to ask you this. Do you watch these TV shows at all?
I do
The
not
CSIs
watch
and
those
stuff.
TV shows. I don't. No, they're so unrealistic that I end up screaming at the TV.
I imagine. Now, do friends and family members know not to mention something they saw or ask you a question based off of CSI Las Vegas or maybe potentially even a CSI Nashville?
Yeah, I think they're pretty much trained for that.
Well, Dr. Adele Lewis, I want to thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. It's fascinating learning about you and your work.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Dr. Adele Lewis is Tennessee's Department of Health's State Chief Medical Examiner. Again, thanks so much for being here.
Yep.
All right. Thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced and directed by Josh Deepan. Our board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. You can also find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.